Hello, everyone, and welcome to ACE the Teacher interview. My name is Liz Willingham. I'm so happy to have you here tonight. Just to get started, there was a note in the invitation, and I also just put a note at the bottom of the screen. Just make sure that you have something either to write with or you are calling in from some sort of a device where you can type notes. I'm going to ask you to draft some responses to frequently asked interview questions, and that's going to be a bulk of the webinar that you're going to find beneficial. So just make sure that you have something there. And we are going to get started. So who are we? If this is your first webinar, welcome. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Selected and who we are before we get started on the content here. So Selected is basically an online matching platform that connects teachers with great schools. So it's absolutely free for teachers always. And the way that it works is that schools apply to you rather than the other way around, which is sort of refreshing, right? You create a profile that takes about 10 minutes. I created one myself to try it out. It took me 11 minutes. I am a little bit slow. I make that joke every time. You're asked a series of questions just about what you're looking for in a school and who you are as a teacher. And then schools are basically doing the same thing on their end. Whenever there is a match, you are notified, and it's up to you after doing a little research on the school, which you can do through our site, whether you want to accept or decline their invitation to match with you. And from that point, on average, teachers get contacted or matched with about 5 schools just in the first week. And these are schools that generally you're excited to teach at and you're a match for. And you also get a coach like myself that will help you through all aspects of the interview process. Again, all of this is completely free. This is what our platform looks like. This is just like a list of schools that you might get matched with, and then it's up to you whether you want to pass on them or connect. You can always change your mind later. Yeah, so we're going to get started. I'm going to go into a little bit more about Selected at the end and give you some additional resources and tell you a little bit more about what we offer. But we're going to get started here on how to ace the teacher interview. So I'm guessing that you're here because if you were super confident and excited about interviews, you probably wouldn't be spending the time to participate in a webinar about interviews. So I'm just going to ask you, this next poll is going to pop up. And that's going to ask you about how you feel about interviews. It says on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the most confident, how do you feel about going on an interview? So it looks like there's a lot of 3s, which is good. Good for you. So you're a little bit nervous maybe, but you're not so nervous that it's keeping you awake at night. 2s and 1s I find to be a little bit more common. So if you're in the 2s or 1s, relax. I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know and nothing that you don't need to know, and you're going to feel a lot better after this webinar, okay? So let's get into it. So if interviews are nerve-wracking for you in any way, you're not alone. Nobody likes interviews, okay? I've met very, very few people who are excited to go on a job interview, whether they're teachers or not. You're worried that you're going to say the wrong thing. You're worried that you're going to expose your flaws, which we're going to talk about. And I am going to tell you that that is completely forgivable. All of those things are absolutely forgivable. Hiring managers and hiring teams are not expecting perfection in any way, shape, or form. They're not expecting you to be perfect. And you can nail this interview and all of your interviews by being yourself, by being 100% yourself. I've been working in schools for over 10 years now. As a teacher, I started out as a teacher, as a recruiter, an instructional coach, and I've seen hundreds and been on hundreds of interviews. And I promise you that the person who gets the job is not always the person who answers the questions perfectly, which is what you're worried about, right? It's the person who is likable, the person who's reflective, and the person that the hiring team sees as somebody who is going to improve over time. Also the person that they want to work with every day, okay? And that person is you. So you're going to get this interview, you're going to do a great job, and you're going to be completely yourself, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it. So Let's get into it. We already tested all of our features and we are ready to go. So here is what our agenda is going to look like for tonight. We're going to get started on the introduction. We're going to talk about the phone interview. The first 3 sections really are just going to be, they're quick. The bulk of this webinar is going to be spent on the in-person interview, and we're going to go over and draft our responses to 4 frequently asked questions, okay? Here's what you're going to learn tonight. Steps of the interview process, how to prepare for a phone screen, and then, like I said, the 4 most frequently asked interview questions and how to craft your responses to them. So again, just make sure that you have something to write with, or you're calling from a device, or using a device that you can type on. All right, so this is generally what the school interview process looks like. Whether it's a private school, a charter school, a district school, any type of school generally follows this structure. And tonight, you'll see in orange, what we're gonna cover is the phone screen and the in-person interview. The phone screen is much more simple than the in-person interview. The phone screen, it's gonna take us 5 minutes to talk about it, so you don't need to worry about that. So, just as a side note, we also have separate workshops, which you may or may not. Raise your hand if you participated in a workshop or a webinar was selected before. I'm gonna test out this hand raising feature. So raise your hand if you, good, a lot of you. Okay, awesome. Welcome back, Lisa, Christy, Veronica, Jenny, and Yvette. And someone else just said, but then it went down too quickly. Awesome, so welcome back, thanks for coming back. And we have, so upcoming webinars on the demo lesson, resume, classroom management workshops, and then just last night we had your ideal school fit. Phone screen. So the phone screen is basically, there's really no, I mean, I'm sure there's a nice way of saying it, but the phone screen is just a really quick conversation that a recruiter, generally a recruiter, wants to have with a candidate, just to see if they're worth the time to bring on site. And the reason for that is because when you come in for an interview, you usually will come in for an interview and a demo lesson at the same time. And that also involves like a school tour. So you're there for really a few hours, and they're investing a lot of time in you, and you're investing a lot of time in them. So they want to have a quick phone screen just to see if you would be a good fit, right? And here's what you need to know for that. 1 is the questions they ask you are generally super basic, and I'll tell you what they usually ask. It's usually about 15 to 30 minutes. And a lot of times it's a recruit, depending on the school, it's a recruiter, sometimes even a teacher, or an administrator that conducts the interview. The other thing that you need to know, if you haven't, who's had a phone interview before? Oh, good, a lot of you, okay. So if you've had a phone interview, you know that a lot of times, I just like to give people a heads up. What happens is the person who is doing the phone interview is typing as you're speaking, which makes for some really awkward moments because it doesn't have the usual give and take of a conversation. Usually when you're talking to someone, you hear a lot of or yep, I know what you mean, or I understand. Oh, I know, you know, that type of thing. You don't hear a lot of that during a phone interview because they're just typing. So people have a tendency to sort of babble because they get nervous. Sort of like if you're going to see a therapist or something and they're just sitting there listening, you're going on and on and on. That's what happens. So just be wary of that. Don't talk too much as a result. And when you're done speaking and answering the question, there's gonna be a silence just because they're still typing. Just wait. Okay, so I just like to give everyone a heads up because that can be a little bit nerve-wracking for some people. So we're gonna get into what you need to know, what you don't need to know for the actual phone interview, how to prepare. All right, here's what you wanna do. By the way, I should have said this in the beginning. I'm gonna send you, as soon as this webinar is over, I'm gonna send you all of these slides. So if you're furiously taking notes, don't worry about it. You can still feel free to take notes, but I'm gonna send you this presentation. Here's what you wanna do to prepare for a phone screen. Research the school's presence on social media, do a quick internet search, get everything that you find out as anything that you can find out about the school. Most schools will either have a Facebook page, Instagram even, they have their own website a lot of times. Just find out as much information as you can. Then you want to plan a pitch. And what that means is basically you want to plan it 30 seconds, make sure it's really 30 seconds, why you're interested in this particular school, and how your experience as a teacher has made you a good fit for their school. That way you're doing all the thinking work for them. That's the reason that they're calling you, is they want to know if you're a good fit for this school and why you're interested in that school. If you do the thinking work for them up front, you're passing the phone interview, hands down. Then you want to prepare the questions, which I'm going to tell you in a second. Prepare questions for the school. This really should come from you. I'm giving you some prompts here, but really don't follow my advice. Just ask them questions that mean something to you. I mean, if you're going to be working there, then you should be asking them questions that are meaningful to you as a teacher, right? These are some common phone screen questions. They're super basic. Why are you looking to make a change? Very common question. They just want to know why you're leaving your current position. Okay, so have an answer ready, and an answer that isn't, that's sort of positive and forward thinking. So when they ask you why you're making a change, or during the interview when they're asking you about your current position, you have to figure out a way to talk about your current experience in a way that's not blaming or negative to the school. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Instead of saying, in response to why are you looking to make a change, instead of saying the administration is awful, they're not supportive at all, there's no expectations for student behavior, the kids are running around crazy, they're running around the hallways with scissors in their hands, you could say, which I hope isn't the case, you could say something like, well, it's a relatively new school, so they're still sort of figuring out the kinks and reworking, their school model, and I'm just really looking to be at a more established school where the expectations are clearer for teachers and for students. So something like that. Just sort of spin it in a way that's forward thinking instead of dwelling on the negative experience that you're having. You want to answer why you're interested in that particular school, which you already are going to be planning. You already planned beforehand. And then if you have any gaps in your resume, maybe a short duration at a school, which happens, it's okay. So if you, for example, got a position, you started teaching in September and then you left in December, just be ready to answer questions about that. They're going to ask you. Okay, it's not a deal breaker by any means. It happens to everybody. If people have ridiculous experiences where they're forced to leave. So just make sure that you have an answer ready. And then here are the red flags. So on your end, if you do any of these things, it's gonna weaken your chances of getting to that next stage. If you're late for the call. So here's what you need to know about that. If you haven't had a phone interview recently, or even if you had, the new trend right now is to send, instead of them calling you at the given time where you have your scheduled phone interview, a lot of times they're sending links. So like a Google Hangouts link, or you got a link for this webinar for Zoom. So just make sure that you check your email and you see beforehand how they're going to be contacting you or you're going to be contacting them. Don't expect to get a phone call. So just make sure you plan that in advance. A lot of people just don't realize they're expecting a phone call, and then all of a sudden they're 5 minutes late to the call. So don't be late for the call for any reason. Go to a quiet space, so no kids in the background, no adults in the background, don't be on a street corner, don't be on the subway, don't be, just find, it's still an interview, find a quiet place and try not to ramble. The way that you avoid rambling is by planning what you're going to say, which is why this giant orange box in the corner, that's what you want to do. You want to plan what you're going to say. So next is this is the bulk of tonight's webinar. So this is going to be 4 questions, and you're going to write out responses to them. So make sure that you have something to write with or type with. This says phone screen, that's a typo, I'm sorry. But it's basically the in-person interview is to make a final assessment whether you're a good fit for the school. Like I said, you will usually go into the school for your in-person interview and your demo at the same time. Usually, this is the structure. You go in, you kind of have a school tour. Sometimes it's a self-guided tour, which is great. You get to look into classrooms. You get to basically be a spy and see if this is a school that you actually want to work in. Then you have your demo lesson, which we have a whole other workshop on. And then afterwards, you have a debrief on the demo lesson and then the interview. This is often the structure, not always by any means. So this is what you need to know. So basic do's and don'ts of the in-person interview. You want to plan responses to frequently asked questions. That's what we're going to do tonight. You don't need to worry about that. It's the same with the phone interview. You want to be positive about challenging experiences. And we'll talk more about that also. Challenging experiences, to be completely honest, I've had many of them. I've taught in some really difficult areas with difficult students. You should be excited about those experiences because they make you the best teacher possible. If it's easy for you early on in your career, that's not a good sign. It should be difficult. And the more difficult it is, the more you learn, basically. So that's just a taste of how to be positive about a challenging experience. But you just want to make sure that you're focusing on what you learned and you're not focusing on why it was challenging, if that makes sense. Okay, any questions about that before I move on? Just that one thing? Okay. And by the way, you'd be surprised because that seems sort of obvious, but I've seen many teachers come into an interview and talk about a difficult experience they had at a school, and they blamed teachers, they blamed students, they blamed administration. And I know that a lot of times it seems like it's everybody else's fault. It's just not something you want to express during the interview. They want to see somebody who's reflective and forward thinking and is trying to learn from these challenging experiences. If you feel yourself rambling, this is a nice little trick. If you feel that they're asking you a question and you know that moment where you realize that you're all of a sudden either you realize you have no idea what you're talking about and you're like, why am I still talking? Why am I still talking? Or you have that moment where you don't even remember what the question was. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, am I even answering their question? What did they even ask me? It's fine. Don't panic. It actually happens all the time. Be honest about it. Just stop for a second if that happens and just say, am I answering your question? And that's completely fine. They actually really appreciate that because it gives them an opportunity to restate the question or to say, yeah, actually you did answer our question. Thank you. Don't be afraid to do that. Have energy and enthusiasm. They want somebody who they're going to enjoy working with, who's excited about being a teacher and about student learning and everything else. So just bring that energy into the interview. And finally, be respectful, friendly to everybody involved during the interview process. I have seen just a few times candidates who are fantastic during the interview, but we find out later that they were rude to the security guard or rude to the people at the front desk or in the office, or rude or unfriendly to the teachers while they were setting up for their demo. This goes without saying, don't do that. I mean, don't do it. Don't be nice just to be nice. But don't be nice just so that you can get the job. Be nice to be nice. But just keep in mind that does happen and that will be a deal breaker for you, okay? We already talked about this. Don't blame students, just don't do it. We understand that how difficult some students can be. We understand that the needs of some students are greater than others. We know. And we get it. Just don't blame them for it. And also just don't misrepresent yourself in any way. Don't try to fit the mold that you feel like the school needs you to fit. So just be who you are, and if the school isn't a good fit for you, then you can get a job somewhere else, okay? You should not have to lie or misrepresent yourself in any way. There are plenty of schools out there that are just right fit for you. And little plug for Selected is if you sign up for Selected, you will get matched with a bunch of schools that are just right fit for you, and you won't have to misrepresent yourself. All right, so now we're gonna plan responses to these questions. Don't worry about writing these down. I'm just introducing them to you. We're gonna go into each one in detail, okay? I'm just preparing you mentally. These are the questions. Okay? So now we're gonna go into each one of them. The first one is describe your approach to lesson planning. I'm gonna give you a framework for how to plan your response to these questions. All right, so it should be noted, by the way, sorry, hang on a second, I'm gonna go back. It should be noted that you obviously don't need this framework for simple questions, like, are you certified? How long have you been teaching? You know, what grade you prefer to teach? Those are questions you can just answer. You don't have to use the framework for questions like that. But basically, this is a 3-part framework that sums up what recruiters, hiring managers, principals, administration are all looking for in candidates. So when I created this workshop, this presentation, I interviewed, Selected on its own, we work with hundreds and hundreds of schools, but I worked with recruiters and administrators from lots of different schools, and some were charter, some were private, some were district, different grade levels, different models, some were progressive, some were traditional and no nonsense. And I was expecting to have a ton of different responses for what they were looking for in a teaching candidate during the interview process. I was expecting them all to say different things, right? And I was really surprised when I found that they all actually said basically the same things, that they were looking for all the same things, which is great news for you because now you know what to do no matter what school you're interviewing at, basically. So what they are looking for are these. So this is, just to be clear, when they ask you a question during the interview, this is what they're looking for in your response. They're looking for that you are applying, that you're talking about what you know, okay? So the first is knowledge. This is basically what you know about how students learn. And if you're a relatively new teacher or you're brand new to a program, this is where you're really gonna shine, right? Because this is all fresh in your head. This is your grad school. This is the books that you're reading. What you know about how students learn. Experiential, inquiry-based, assessment types, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of that, excuse me. This is when you have an opportunity to talk about that. Application is when you can talk about how you actually apply that knowledge in your classroom. So knowledge is what you know, application is what you do in your classroom. You want to paint a picture for them of what your classroom looks like, how you instruct, how you interact with students, what systems you have in place. So again, what you know, what you do, and then finally, this last piece, the ownership piece, this is all the buzz right now. This is the growth mindset. Who knows raise your hand if you know what growth mindset is. I won't call on you, don't worry. What it is, so what a fixed mindset is a fixed mindset, which is the opposite, is when you believe that traits are inherited and they're sort of fixed and unchanging. So in other words, if you feel like if you get a bad grade on a math test, if you have a fixed mindset, you believe that that's something that you can't control and that's just inherited by you. You're like, I'm bad at math, right? Who's been there? I mean, I've been there. It's like you get a poor grade on a math test, or you try an attempt at an art project and you're like, I'm bad at drawing, right? You just think this is something that you can't change. A growth mindset, if you have a growth mindset, you believe that you can work to get better at things. That there's a component of everything that involves change, basically. So whatever it is that you're struggling with, you can get better if you choose to get better at it. And we want our students to have a growth mindset, to get that self-efficacy, like Veronica was saying. And we also want to have a growth mindset for ourselves. If you're a teacher and you have a growth mindset, you're going to be much, much happier. I promise you. Because you're going to have days where you're going to get beat up. Hopefully not literally, but you have days when you get beat up. At the end of the day, you want to just say to yourself, like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to be better. This is, I will get better. This isn't me as a person. I'm not a bad teacher. I'm just a person who is learning. Okay? So enough about growth mindset. Basically, the ownership piece is when you respond to questions, you want to show that you have that growth mindset. You want to show that you are attempting to get better, that you're reflective, that you see your work as something that's changing and improving over time. Okay? And if you're still confused, don't worry, I'm going to give you a ton of examples. I'm not going to take questions now, actually, because I feel like I'm going to give you a bunch of examples and they're going to clear things up a little bit. All right, so here's an example. Describe your approach to lesson planning. I'll give you one example, and then I'll give you another example that's a little bit more sophisticated. So take a minute and just read this to yourself. It's good that they know that a lot of the students didn't pass the state scientist, but they didn't say what percentage. They also didn't say they're creating their own lesson plans, but what are those doing for the test scores? We have no idea, right? And the kids like it. How do you know that the kids like it? So this is all just based on feeling, right? Okay, the next response. So take a minute and read this. And just start thinking about what's different about this response. Hi.
Hi, Salisa?
Salisa, okay.
Yes. Okay, so for this particular response, it's different from one because the candidate did not just mention the curriculum, they also mentioned the approach to learning in the classroom, the experiential method. And as far as ownership, the candidates spoke about, you know, where the lesson comes from, and that it's modified to meet the needs of students in the classroom. How templates are used for planning, that they meet with their colleagues to map out the curriculum, reteaching takes place. Also, within the classroom, assessment of student learning to determine if the students have met the learning objective for the day, I presume.
Awesome. Basically, this person talks about what they know about how students learn, how they're applying that in the classroom. They're obviously looking at data constantly and analyzing it, trying new things, doing whatever it takes to show that, doing whatever it takes to make sure that student learning happens, right? So this is what, and you're going to get other examples also. They're obviously just very thoughtful in their planning. So now it's your turn to plan. And I'm going to turn on the light. I just realized it's getting dark in here and I was relying on natural light for reasons unknown. So we're going to go to the next one and you're going to plan your response. So make sure, same question, make sure that you talk about the basic structure of your planning process, your theoretical background. So like where your, you know, what your feelings are on how students learn, incorporate data in any way. If you're new to teaching, then just make sure you talk about how you plan to do these things, and then any student accommodations that you need to be made. Okay, so Okay, so that was about 3.5 minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to plan out your response. Next question is, this one, some form of this, sorry, I just realized the video wasn't on, some form of this will be asked. I will be shocked if you don't get asked something about classroom management. What is your philosophy on classroom management, and how do you set up expectations for behavior? So just take a minute and read this exemplary response to yourself. It might inspire you. So one thing that's important is a great response. One thing that's important to note is if this is intimidating for you, because you're like, there's no way I'm going to come up with that in an interview, that's fine. The reason that we plan this way, where we write out every little thing, is because I'm not expecting you to remember everything. If you even say half of this, you're in really, really good shape, okay? So just keep that in mind. I want to make sure that your response has knowledge, application, and ownership. I'll give you about a few more seconds just to look at this slide before we go to the next, which is you planning your own response. Make sure you can, and you can start writing at any point. What are your core beliefs about student socio-emotional learning? What is your role in promoting positive student behavior? So do you believe that the teacher should be the facilitator? Do you believe that that all of the work should really come from you? It should be teacher-centered, student-centered. And then how do you set up your classroom for success at the start of the year? So what routines do you have in place? What systems do you have in place as far as classroom management? You do not have to include all of these things. These are just for inspiration, okay? So 3 minutes starting now for you to craft your responses. Okay, so we are going to move on to the next question. I think what I'm gonna do in the interest of saving time is just pose the question and just give you a little bit less time just because it's already 8:02. But I will send you the slides right after this is over so that you can sort of do the work on your own time. And then I'll get to the end of the presentation. So third question is, and again, I'm not going to give you a ton of time to complete these responses because we're so over. What are your areas of growth as an educator? They will ask some form of this. It's basically saying, what are your weaknesses? And you should have an answer ready because this can go very, very badly. Here's a sample. Just take 30 seconds and read this. Okay, so this person, you can tell, is very reflective, right? They noticed, they didn't say my weakness is that I get frustrated, which some teachers say. What they said is, I noticed that I was getting frustrated because, and then they worked to try to change what was causing them the frustration. What they're also doing is they're spinning this area of growth into a strength, which is something that you definitely want to attempt to do. It's not only that, but they're also showing all the different things that they did to attempt to fix this problem that they were having. Okay, so whatever it is your area of growth is, whether it's organization, classroom management, knowledge or content gap, you just want to make sure that you're talking. You're talking about how you took ownership over it and how you've been working on it. Even if you get to the point where you say it's still an area of growth, just make sure you say all the different things you've tried, okay? You want to talk about strategies that you've used to improve, and then evaluate those strategies and talk about whether they've worked or not, and then any next steps. And you can ask me questions on the side too. So I'm just going to give you a minute. Okay, we are back. Feel free, by the way, this is coming up with ideas for this question is something that people struggle with. Feel free to share what your area of growth is in the group chat. So you don't have to go into detail about it. Just say like, classroom management or organizational skills. Those are to me the answers that are most easy to reflect on, but feel free to do that. We will move on to the next question. And this is the last question. You will be asked a data question. You will 100% be asked a data question. How do you measure whether your students are learning, and what do you do with that data? They will ask you this in some form or another. Exemplary response, take a few minutes to read it. So this person is talking about how they assess during lessons, after lessons, how they use unit assessments, what they do with the data, where there are gaps in their assessment. They're anticipating where students might struggle, and they plan in extra weeks for reteaching. What else? How they use the data for their report cards. They're thinking about every way that they assess possible, and they're making sure that they voice that. So make sure that you say everything that you know. You're going to forget some things. Again, this is not, if you say all of this, you are a rock star. If you say half of this, you're in real good shape, okay? So plan your response. You're gonna take about a minute to plan this response. All right. Again, I'm gonna send you this presentation afterwards so that you can do this work sort of on your own and craft your responses. And we are going to move on. Those are the four, again, actually, I don't think I mentioned this. Those are the four most frequently asked questions. Even if you don't get asked all four of those questions, the preparation that you do in crafting the responses and drafting your responses to them, and using the formula that I gave you, the framework, sorry, you're gonna be much better equipped to handle any questions that come your way. So if they ask you some form of any of those questions, you're gonna be more prepared if you plan the responses to that, okay? So I would highly recommend that after we're done with this webinar, at some point before your interview, you use this presentation to help you to plan for your next interview. And then you will find this next slide very helpful. These are additional questions. So you can just read them, but I'll send this to you, so don't furiously copy them down. But these are other very frequently asked questions. Some of these are a little more difficult than others. And don't worry, I will send them to you. And then finally, just selected, these are other resources that we offer. So this online webinar, we have another one next week. We have an in-person, actually we have an in-person workshop next week for those of you who are in the New York City area, which I think is most of you. Our office is on 26th and 11th, but the exact address is on the Eventbrite on our website. But we have an in-person workshop, how to ace the teacher demo lesson. Most people, if you are scared of or nervous about the interview, the demo lesson to me is actually more intimidating. So it's also free. You can sign up for that workshop. Next month, we have a ton of other webinars. Just check out our website for a list of when those are happening. And then we have, again, Selected is always free for teachers. Create a profile, it will take you 10 minutes. You can list where you want to teach, what you want to teach. You can list what kind of school you're looking for, just everything that you want. You just basically put into a system and it creates a bunch of matches of schools that you'd be a good fit for. So I highly recommend, if I were a teacher still, I would 100% be creating an account. And then we also have a blog, which each week, if you're on our mailing list, basically almost every week we have a new article that will help you with different aspects of the job search. So yeah, go to getselected.com, guys, and sign up for your free profile. Thank you so much for coming, and I will hang out for the next 5 minutes or so if you want to raise your hand and ask a question. And if not, just expect by the end of tonight, maybe not right away, I will be sending you this presentation. Okay, so thank you all. I hope that you got something out of it. I definitely did. And good luck to all of you.